always focused on the behavior. Kids crying, kids breaking something, kids screaming, whatever it might be. Even on the good side, he's sitting in his seat, he's eating well, whatever it might be. It's always focused on the behavior.
Right.
And if it's negative, it's typically there's a consequence, right? There's something we're going to do to kind of rectify the behavior. She talks about the antecedent. So what happened before that behavior happened? Right. I had a situation like a couple weeks ago. I was doing a Zoom meeting with a student, and the week before was a perfect meeting. Everything was awesome. He was all in. And then this week was difficult. He's kind of like, oh man, I don't want to do this. Arms up. Literally, he's like, man, I don't want to do this. And then we kind of worked through it. And ultimately, I was looking when I talked to mom after it was all said and done, was the antecedent. So what was the difference between last week and this week? And it came down to nutrition. He had gotten up really early that day. He basically had very little for breakfast. He had like a donut or something they grabbed to go. The antecedent in this case was nutrition, or lack thereof.
You're listening to the Just Sayin Podcast, offering conversations with experts that will educate, inform, and entertain. Here's your host of the Just Sayin Podcast, Charlie Cornacchio.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the Just Sayin Podcast. As we talk about essential workers and job heroes during this time of this national pandemic, and it's positively right to do those things, to honor the frontline men and women who keep us healthy and try to protect us as well. But there are other essential workers, which are probably the most important jobs on earth, and that is the job of a parent. But first, today's podcast is sponsored by New Leaf Hypnosis, where hypnotist Anthony Serino helps you to become the you that you deserve. And you don't even have to leave your house. Anthony has been so successful in helping people with fears and phobias and weight loss, and even those suffering with chronic pain. He does it through a Zoom call. I Zoomed with Anthony for weight loss, like many of you. I think the 19 and COVID-19 stands for how many pounds you'll gain while staying home. So he helped me with that. And the remarkable thing is I used to be an Oreo cookie fanatic, any sweets actually, but in the past 4 weeks, I have not had an Oreo cookie or any cookie or a chip or a cake or most anything that's sweet. And that's because Anthony helped me to see those sweets in a different way. So check out New Leaf Hypnosis and see what he can do for you. This podcast is also sponsored by the Winning Athletic Scholarship Video Blueprint, helping student athletes produce a results-oriented video that will help set them apart from all of the other video submissions college coaches get bombarded with. And if you want to make a great first impression on a college coach, this is the way to do it, and it's COVID-proof. So check it out at athleticscholarshipvideo.com. So today we are joined by one of the creators of Sound Foundations for Parenting, the podcast, which provides parenting secrets and education from some of the best parenting innovators around. They talk about everything from helping your child's anxiety, attention span, health, parent-child relationships, and education. Darren McCarthy has a degree in elementary education. He's a co-founder of the podcast, along with Brian Powers, who has a degree in marketing. So both of them are very passionate about being fathers. And Darren joins us today from Goshen, New York, by way of San Diego, California. And Darren, thanks for coming on to the podcast.
Absolutely. And a pleasure to be here. And we're coming from Slow Motion Goshen.
Slow Motion Goshen, which is a beautiful, beautiful town. That's where you're originally from, right?
Yes, sir. Come full circle.
Yeah. So you taught in the New York education system, and then you went to South Carolina, and then you went to Nevada, and then you decided to start the podcast with Brian. What along the way in your path of education have you seen, or that has inspired you to do a subject on parenting? I would think it would be education.
Well, yeah, and to me, the words are synonymous. Because if, there's an old expression that if those that dare to teach must never cease to learn. And what is parenting? Parenting is teaching, right? And so that education piece all ties in to the parenting piece. Now, I mean, you know, I'm a little bit of an older parent. I'm not the oldest parent, mind you, in the elementary school, but I'm an older parent, right? And so we started our family a little bit later, my wife and I, and we were out there in the education field. She also comes from education. But I learned a lot of things in the classroom, and I learned a lot of, you know, I taught in South Carolina just for a year, but it was the family dynamic that was probably the most difficult part of the teaching job. You know, I had some really poverty. It was a really interesting dichotomy down there. I was in Beaufort, South Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
And Beaufort, South Carolina has Parris Island, which is a Marine Corps base, and then it has a very high poverty stricken area as well. So I was taught 39 kids in that classroom. So kids were sitting on the air conditioners.
Oh my God.
Right. And it was a very difficult environment out of the gate. I was very young, you know, a little bit idealistic about what I wanted to do and so on and so forth. So it was kind of like, you know, get back in your place. And, you know, and then from there, I went on to Vegas and taught at a Blue Ribbon school in Vegas, but then they changed the busting zones. And so again, it was, you know, dealing with a lot of behavioral stuff, but the behavioral stuff that you see in kids is often tied to what happens at home.
Oh, okay.
You know, and so that's why I say the two things, you know, I'm throwing around the word edu-parenting, because the two things they tie together so tightly.
Right.
And so, you know, I put out a blog not too long ago that it was basically, what are you dealing with when you're a teacher? And so people talk about the pandemic right now, for example, you know, and there's a lot of opinions going on around, you know, some teachers are doing a good job, some aren't doing a good job, so on and so forth. But every child is different and their dynamic is different. So the things they bring to the table are so different, you know, and in the blog post I start, you know, I take a ride on the bus and think about every kid, what house they're coming from, and are their parents together, and are they living with their grandparents, and you know, and you think about that as you're kind of building the school bus, right? Everybody stops and they come in, and some kids come from the big mansion and some come from the farm, and all of that is coming to school, right? And so we tie that into parenting, and I'll take it full circle because I like to talk. But so you think about all of that idea of all that coming to the plate, and then you have to start to break things from an education perspective. We learn about child development. So there's a guy, Piaget, and if you're an elementary ed person, that's like, you're so tired of hearing this guy's name. By the time you're done with your 4 years, you never want to hear it again. But all those theories about, you know, hierarchy of needs from Maslow and all these different theories, they all kind of start to make sense when you have kids. You know, it's developmental. Things happen in a sequential manner, right? So first the child's born, and then they learn to cry for their needs, and then they can, you know, start to kind of sit up, and we follow our kids along the way. Now, you're a dad of 4, you know that process, and we're so excited in the early stages, and then we stop thinking about all that development, and it becomes mostly about behavior, right? It's like, well, a kid's not behaving, or a kid is behaving, and so all these billions of questions we have when they're so young become questions about 2 or 3 different topics. Well, the kid's still developing, right? There's still needs, there's still challenges. And as a parent, you just got to keep asking questions, right? And so you start thinking along those lines, and the development of the podcast came because I was fortunate enough to learn from some really phenomenal people. I took the back roads to get there. And I think I hit every mud path along the way. You know, I mean, for me, public school was a very difficult challenge. And I had shingles as a 23-year-old, and I broke up a lot of fights. And, you know, it was just a very difficult thing. And I didn't make it through, bottom line. And a lot of teachers don't make it past 2 years. But I had the great fortune of, when I got to San Diego, long story short is, like, you know, I wanted to get back into education when I got out there and get a job, and I opened up the Yellow Pages, which shows you how long ago it was. And I looked, and I needed to get a job that was like within walking distance because my car had broken down.
Oh boy. And
so I found this place called the Moyers Learning Center. And I walked in, and there was a woman, you know, probably in her 60s at the time, and she had like the old school display and presentation and PowerPoint and stuff, but it wasn't PowerPoint, it wasn't fancy.
Sure.
Right. but she was playing classical music, and everything she was talking about was outside the box. And I was like, wow, this is interesting, because I wasn't that kind of regular student, you know. I mean, I was a kid I was nice, and I sat in the back, and I just wanted you to kind of leave me alone and give me my C's and B's and let me get out of there, right? Which is a lot of kids, right? So I met this woman. Her name is Gail Moyers, and to this day, she's still a mentor of mine. But she introduced me to other wonderful people that did things outside the box, like Dr. Joan Smith, who has 6 books on dyslexia, and she works on executive function and you know, a lot of things that really gets into nutrition and diet and stuff. So you kind of change your mindset. You start to look at things in layers. So if the challenge is this, is that really the challenge, or is it this? Yeah. Is that really the challenge, or is it, you know what I mean? It's almost like this detective work to try to figure out, okay, well, how do I get to the core of the issue?
Yeah.
And, you know, so if you go to our website and you see all the different guests we've had, you'll see somebody on sleep, somebody on nutrition, somebody on, you know, all these different topics across the board. We have a woman, lovely woman out of, you know, she has a program called Muddy Puddles where she teaches a curriculum of kids playing outside. So that's developmental, right? So the kids got to get dirty. They got to get kinesthetic learning is what we call it. Right. And so you see all these different topics, but there's a reason for them. It's not just arbitrarily just pick somebody.
Yep.
You know, it's most all of the people that we've talked to so far in our circle have come from either they were a parent and they couldn't find the answer, or they were educator and didn't believe the answer that was there was the right answer. And so we always say outside the box, and really what we mean is looking at the same challenge with a different set of eyes. Yeah. And you know, and our kids, they're not developing at any faster rate. They're not developing, you know, we don't have 3 legs now and, you know, 4 arms. Right. We're still human, and we still develop at a, you know, an interesting thing.
Mentally, I think kids are developing a lot faster than we did, or certainly I did as a child, because of the stimulation that they have with computers and devices and things like that. Do you agree with that?
Well, it depends on how you're kind of using the word development, right? So they're exposed to more. Does it mean that they're developing at a faster rate? You know, there's this old theory about reading where, if I get the stat right, it's basically if you leave a kid alone versus giving them a lot of like intervention, and you're constantly teaching them, by the time they get to 7 years old, they're kind of both at the same place. Oh. And so a part of this whole developmental kind of model, we call it Gestalt, it means teaching the whole child. Right. Is recognizing what to do and when to do it. Yeah. Right. And I think it's a great point that you bring up. And I think that's kind of, to me, it's kind of a false perception of reality. It assumes that because we have all this technology, that we can advance ourselves to deal with it. And the truth of the matter is, the way I saw this kind of pandemic when it first came out was an opportunity to reset. And like we were moving too fast. Yeah. And it's almost like, okay, let's press pause. Let's figure out where we all are. Right. You know, and that's kind of what we did as a family. You know, from a parenting perspective, we were actually, before I came on, we were playing volleyball in the yard, you know. Right. So we came in and we got tight and we looked at our lives, and there was a point where I saw the moon 10 days in a row, and I was like, I think that's the first time I've done that in years, man. Yeah. You know.
Well, let's you know, we're going to give the URL so that people can get onto your podcast. One of the things that you talked about, you just mentioned, and a podcast that you did, I think it was 2 podcasts ago, which was One Size Fits One, which, you know, kind of works exactly to what you're talking about, that it's not just, you know, kind of like, you know, throw it out there and every kid's going to learn the same, because they come from different socio backgrounds, financial backgrounds, all that stuff. So so that's some of the good stuff that you get from your website. But you guys bring in experts You don't claim to be the experts. You bring in experts. They share their knowledge. You probably have learned so much just by interviewing people over the course of the podcasts, which has been a little over a year now, right?
Yeah. We're up to we're about 30 episodes now.
Yeah.
A few in the can, kind of waiting.
So what would you say would be like one of the revelations that really blew your mind from an interview that you did with somebody about parenting?
It's a really good question. It's got me thinking, because we've had a lot of different things, and we just came out with this thing
I'm
called,
sure, yeah.
50 things we learned in 25 episodes, right? So I just finished typing that, and in my mind, I'm picturing, okay, there's a couple of things that really stand out. Dr. Erica Vivian, who came on, and she's a psych background out of Austin, Texas. And she said, she wrote a blog for us, and it's ABC, which is antecedent behavior consequence. And so what you're doing is we're always focused on the behavior. Kids crying, kids breaking something, kids screaming, whatever it might be. Even on the good side, he's sitting in his seat, he's eating well, whatever it might be. It's always focused on the behavior.
Right.
And if it's negative, it's typically there's a consequence, right? There's something we're going to do to kind of rectify the behavior. She talks about the antecedent. So what happened before that behavior happened? Right? I had a situation like a couple weeks ago. I was doing a Zoom meeting with a student, and the week before was a perfect meeting. Everything was awesome. He was all in. And then this week was difficult. He's kind of like, oh man, I don't want to do this. Arms up. Literally, he's like, man, I don't want to do this. And then we kind of worked through it. And ultimately, I was looking when I talked to mom after it was all said and done, was the antecedent. So what was the difference between last week and this week? And it came down to nutrition. He had gotten up really early that day. He basically had very little for breakfast. He had like a donut or something they grabbed to go. The antecedent in this case was nutrition, or lack thereof. Right. And so it follows that same concept. See that behavior ABC thing?
Yeah.
Right. And then as on your topic, to fill it out, the second thing was when we were talking to the sleep specialist, right? She calls herself the sleep guru, which everybody needed, when this thing started, nobody was sleeping, or at least we weren't,
Right. Yeah.
And so we were talking about kind of the environment. And I wanted to get into, is it good with the LED lights and to have your modem on while you're trying to sleep, all this stuff. And then she got into, there's a lot of different reasons why we're not sleeping. And she started talking about nutrition. And then she started talking about acid reflux. Yeah. And so acid reflux, that's the antecedent, right? And the behavior ultimately is we're not sleeping. And as a consequence, we're tired and we're anxious and all that other good stuff.
Yeah.
So you get this kind of ABC thought process. And that was pretty enlightening for me. Sometimes the simplest answer is like, it's in your face, but you just don't recognize it.
Sure. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
Yeah.
They say that there are probably like 5 parenting styles, like a disciplinarian, permissive, uninvolved, overbearing, protective. And I guess really there's 6, because you might have a couple of those things at different times, or all of those things. I'm not sure. And maybe that would be a balanced approach. So if you look at that in those categories, which style or styles do you feel you are as a parent?
The one word that kind of resonates as you're saying that is engagement. Right. My approach and my wife's approach is to be fully engaged. Right. If there's there's a thing that we do where the kids kind of gain points and then they can cash them in at the end of the week.
Oh.
Right. And some kids, the whole point.
My daughter-in-law does sort of the same thing, but go ahead.
Okay, yeah.
Go ahead.
So and then they choose what they want to win. And just to give you an idea, what both my kids were working towards was trampoline time with dad. Right. So They weren't working for a new iPod, or they weren't working. And not to say that we don't have that and we're like the perfect family and don't have TV and cable and all that stuff. The bottom line is we do. But that engagement piece, our theory is that they're not going to be young forever. You don't want to have this life of regrets. My dad he left when I was 3. Right. So somewhere inherently in me was, you know what, that's not going to be the dad I'm going to, I want to be. I want to be present. I want to be engaged, and it's happening. You know how it is. I mean, it's 2 seconds later and suddenly, they're getting in the car and then they're off to college or wherever they go.
Yeah.
And it's just happening at the speed of light. And I think we overvalue whatever work might be, whatever, think about those, we're always answering the call when it comes.
Yeah.
Let it go to voicemail for once in your life. You know?
If there's any regret that I have as a parent, it's that, because I was working like crazy. I was working 2 or 3 jobs, just trying to, make ends meet and do that kind of thing. But, and then it became a habit. And so I just started working, and instead of saying, no, I don't need to do that right now, which I probably could have done. I'll spend time with the family here and we'll do stuff like play volleyball or whatever it is. I chose to work. And it's a big regret that I have. And for anybody out there who's a younger parent, like Darren's saying, that time goes really quick. And then you get to a place where it's like, man, I wish I would have. I wish I should have. And you don't want to be there, Listen, my kids, I'm very fortunate. My kids are great. We have a great relationship, but there are still things that I think I could have done. And I see that my kids are actually doing with their kids. Talk about being engaged and involved.
Right.
My kids are so engaged with their kids. I love it. I mean, I just love watching that dynamic and how that happens. But I've noticed, let me ask your opinion on this, because I've noticed that things have changed a lot since I was a parent. And I see that there are some parents with a method of distraction. In other words, Bobby's about to put his finger in the light socket. And the parent's like, oh, hey, Bobby, look at this toy. Come on over here. Instead of saying no, they're distracting and deflecting. And I'm wondering, does that then lose the opportunity to create boundaries for a child by, kind of deflecting?
Right. Yes. I mean, the long and short of it is you say rescue is robbery.
What do you mean by that?
So rescue is robbery is basically if you're saving them from something.
Oh, yeah. Right.
Right. Remember when we were kids, we used to have tough skins, like the jeans that had the big, patches on them so that we didn't cut up our, right. and you just went out and you played and you learned, and that's like, So if we don't have any grit, not to say that it's okay to just let your kid put your finger in the socket,
right.
But there are moments where you kind of have to let them fall a little bit so that they can pick themselves up. And that's what I mean when I say rescue is robbery. But the other piece is when I use that term eduparenting, right? That's an opportunity for you to sit down and look them eye to eye, get on the floor with them and explain, not over explain because they don't have the language that we do, but explain in a way that they would understand. But I think there's this problem with time management where we're always kind of fighting. Well, if I do that, I won't be able to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And the bottom line is, if you don't take those 3 minutes out to explain to them, you're going to have to do it 10 more times. So it just costs yourself 30 minutes.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. And so, and that, I mean, I think that's the eduparenting piece, but it's also, that's the engagement piece.
Yeah.
Get involved.
Yeah. And I think when you get involved, you're building a sense of trust and respect with your kid, because you're engaged with them, you're showing them good positive reinforcement, attention, and everything else. And I think, parents need to trust and respect each other, because then they're on the same page as far as kind of raising the kid. The worst thing in the world is, when kids play against each other, each parent, like dad says, nope, you can't go to the store. And then they go to mom and mom says, yeah, sure, you can go to the store, and then you've got that between the two parents. So I think it's kind of starts there, right?
Yeah. Yeah. One of the businesses we work tightly with is Learning Ears, who I work with Gail Moyers on that, and that's a reading language communication program. And the concept there is that language is so vital, right? So language is what you need to be able to explain that. Like I said, not over explain it where they get lost in the words, but explain it in a way that they understand and they'll learn to use it next time. Right. And that language that, hey, say husband and wife are having, whether it's a divorce or, they're happily married, that language that they use, the kids are sponges.
Oh yeah.
They see that. They see the language, they catch the words, they see the movement of the hands,
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and they're just sitting there catching it all in and using it for later.
And that's right. They're taking notes and they're learning, and saying, "Oh, I'm going to use this then." We used to have a thing with my wife. My wife is probably the reason that my kids are the way they are. And I was more the disciplinarian because I wasn't at home with them as much, and it wasn't like wait till your father gets home. She never said that, but I grew up in an Italian household, so everything was was pretty forceful, they didn't hold back, they told you exactly,
what's the matter with you?
Yeah, right. Oh yeah, no, I got all that, slap in the back of the head. Right. So I didn't carry those things, but I was a disciplinarian, and there would be times where the kid would be, whoever it was, would be standing in front of me, and I would be, yelling at them or, saying stuff and deciding what the punishment was going to be for whatever they did. My wife would be behind them looking at me, and she would just be looking at me and go, just like that. And I would just completely change around and go, oh, all right, forget it. Go ahead, go,
Right.
But that's what happens when you have that symbiotic relationship and everything is on the same page with spouses, I guess.
Yeah, you're absolutely. And you could dive deep into a lot of this stuff that's kind of outside the realm of my background, but I think it's important to note that parenting is constantly learning, and it's constantly learning not only by watching and engaging with your kids, but also from others that have been doing this for a long time. We learn from our peers as well, and I've learned a lot from younger generations and how they engage with their kids in different ways. There's some dads are out there learning the TikTok dance and doing it with the kid,
Right,
that's, it's funny, but but what does that show you? That shows you that they give a rip.
Yep.
And that's, I think that's important.
And I think that's what I take and get away from your podcast. What I take away from your podcast is that you have all of these experts coming on with this great knowledge that, if you listen to a portion of one of the episodes, you're going to come away with something that you can use, which is really good. It's a great service that you're providing. Let's put your educational hat on for a second. Sure. And talk about homeschooling and what's happening now and how you feel about that.
So the concept of the hybrid versus all in, and it seems to have kind of a little bit of a political bent right now. To me, parenting is not a political activity. It's really what I think is best for my children. And we're trying to work on this whole scheduling environment where everything is well organized. We know what we're doing and when we're doing it and where we're doing it, to keep it all kind of nice and neat. And we've got this whole planner thing called, the Big Rocks Little Kids.
Oh,
which we're using.
Yes.
We're implementing that. We're giving that to your viewers as well. And so you just go to our website and you just download it.
Yeah, take a look.
Easy.
We put it up on the screen so that people can go to it. But talk a little bit about that. What that is.
So and I've just to tie into what your question was, it's like the first thing that I thought of back in March was like, okay, now what? Right? Like, well, how do I get, I'm not organized, man. It's like, and it's like, the reason I can go play volleyball with my kids, because I probably forgot what I was supposed to do. Right? but the bottom line is like, I said, okay, how do we get everything we need to get in and get organized and get it all planned out so that I can be uber planned, so that everything can kind of fall into place like normally, right? You over plan so you can fall into a normal activity, right? So that correlates to whether you're a hybrid or whether they're going to school part-time or whatever they may be doing. You got to get your ducks in a row.
Right.
And the other piece that I recommend that we're also doing is we're working on core underlying challenges, right? So everybody's so caught up in curriculum and just getting good grades and everything else. But there's underlying things that if you work on them, they're going to help your kids throughout their whole lives, right? So now is the time to do, like, one of our program things that we offer on the website is called Radish Kids. And so my daughter literally, she texted me while we were on. She's like, my box came, and Radish Kids is recipes that the kids do. And then they send a little utensil, or they send, an apron or different things. And the kids, it comes to them, so they get excited. So what are they getting? They're getting nutrition. And if you're doing it like true homeschoolers, we'll make that into a math and science lesson. Right? And that's a little bit tricky for parents that haven't done it before. But what are you getting out of it? You're getting engagement, you're getting good nutrition, and you're getting some degree of some kind of curriculum. Right. And that's the way my mindset works. And as a parent, you're so focused on, okay, let's get them on the video, let's do the homework and move on. But do you have an opportunity here to help the entire family get organized, do the right thing, and then the homework and everything becomes easier? Does that make sense? Right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So you're working smarter, not harder.
Right. Yeah. And I've seen examples of that with, some parents who might be a little leaning towards creative, in their job or whatever, they're graphics designer, and that they're able to figure out graphics and put that into a lesson. Or, my daughter is a teacher, and so she has like cool little things that she does with her 3 kids. And they're all different ages, but they all kind of do it together, and you pick those opportunities to do that, make it creative, but keeping it all together as a family, so to speak. I think it's really important.
Well, and I think, what is it? I think it was Dr. Phil that said, parenting is a verb.
Oh, yeah.
And if you're trying to take everything that's happening with the kids and wrap that into your kind of normal work life,
right,
it's gonna feel overwhelming. It's gonna be working harder, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, you gotta be engaged. You gotta get back in, roll up your sleeves and do it, man.
And I think one of the things that drawbacks, I don't know the answer for it, but I think the schools are failing in the fact that there's no sense of consistency from area to area, so like one district is doing a hybrid approach, another is doing all in, another is doing nobody in. And it's really frustrating for the parents, I'm sure, because they've got their jobs to do, and then who's going to watch the kids? There's another thing I saw. I'll get your take on this, and that was that teachers are getting upset because parents are listening in on the classes through the Zoom calls or whatever, and teachers want to prevent that. And I'm wondering what your take is as a teacher and as a parent, when teachers are saying they don't want the parents to listen in. Is there a reason for that?
If I think about that kind of objectively, my first thought is there's a rule in school where parents don't observe. Right? Now, whether that's the right rule or the wrong rule, it's a rule in school. You can't just typically go in the back of the classroom and observe. Right? So it sounds to me, and it's been a long time since I worked for the public schools, that they're trying to enforce similar rules on Zoom as they would in the classroom. Now, whether or not the rule is right or wrong, that's a whole different topic, but that is a rule in the school, which would make logical sense that it wouldn't be a rule. It would also try to be enforced in that other environment. Bottom line is, like, when I was teaching, I'll go back to South Carolina, right? Because I had the Marines that were very engaged and wanted their kids to have the best possible education in the world. And then I had the other kids that were, worried about eating that morning.
Yeah. Right.
And so, like, you can't have this expectation as you're going to want the best for your kids, but that's on you, right? The school is going to provide like what we think is, you know, the hopefully the best education possible, but it's on you as a parent. You can't just drop them off at the curb and say, bring them back a better, you know, when they're 18.
And a lot of parents do that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's the big challenge. I mean, as far as like, I couldn't imagine trying to teach where you've got every parent on the line, man.
Yeah.
You know, it's not hard enough to keep the kids in the seat, let alone, you know, getting all, and you're going to get those opinions too. Well, why are you teaching it like this? And why is that? And so I mean, I'm putting myself out there, but I think the reasoning is because they want to keep the same kind of rule.
Yeah. Okay.
You know?
I mean, and I'm with you there. I can, there's two sides to every story. And
Sure.
So I can see the parent saying, you know, well, in this climate, this political climate that we're in, and what we see what's happening on the streets and people attributing it to messages that kids are getting in college from professors. I don't want that happening in my classroom with my kid, you know, so I'm going to listen in the doorway and just make sure that when they talk about history, they're talking about history, not what, you know, it should be perceived history, that kind of thing. That's number one.
Yeah. I mean, you can't, like you talked about being creative before. One of the things that gets missed with teachers is they are creative. They're some of the most creative people in the country, right? And so as soon as you put handcuffs on a creative person,
oh yeah,
you're done. I mean, they're done, you're done, you know, and you kind of, it's almost like you force a problem,
right?
You know, you can't engage, you can't be involved, you can't do that thing that, you know. I remember I did, what was it, Mr. Wendell? Remember that song?
No.
It was an old school song, and it was and I just did it as a poem. But I woke up that morning and I heard the song and I was like, this would be a good poem to do. And then I had this capricious moment where I decided to go through that basically break down the song as a poem.
Oh wow.
And that was one of the most, you know, the best like plan that we had. And I wouldn't have been able to do that if, you know, a parent was like, well, I got one parent like, well, why them? And that rapper was involved in this and that and the other thing. Like, I'm not thinking about that stuff. You know, I don't have time to analyze and
yeah, right.
Yeah.
And you shouldn't have to either, you know.
Right. So we have to be realistic about what our expectations are for teachers, man. I'm grateful that, you know, that we have those people in those roles, and they honestly should have been considered essential from the get-go. You know?
I agree with you there. You know, I don't think teachers are paid nearly enough for what they do or what they're responsible for. The good ones, anyway.
Right. Yeah.
But all right. So, what is in store for the Sound Foundation's Parenting Podcast? I know you just recently talked about getting unstuck, talking about getting yourself unstuck so that you could be more available as a parent to your kids and your family. We mentioned the one size fits one. What are some of the other things on the horizon that you guys are working on?
So, yeah, I mean, believe it or not, we've actually had some difficulty trying to find people with nutrition background. Because a lot of times, I mean, listen, people have to make a living. So they jump into kind of the space more towards CEOs and corporates and, you know, adults. And it's hard to find people that actually emphasize, you know, children's nutrition. So we found somebody. She'll be on in the next couple of weeks, and we're gonna. I think you round out that conversation by we're gonna have an occupational therapist talk about sensory eating. And so you as a parent often think, well, you see this, right? The kids eat nothing but beige foods. Right, and right. Pasta, cheese, chicken nuggets, everything looks the same, right? Same color. So there's a sensory thought process behind that, and so that ties into what the nutrition piece is. And in my mind and Brian's mind is we picture like a baseball diamond, and so there's like first base is, and the most kind of it's a little bit more hierarchical than that, almost like I guess a pyramid. So it's your physical needs first, then your social emotional needs, and then your cognitive needs, right? And so your physical needs, social emotional, sometimes your behaviors are so tricky that you got to do something first to handle it, right? But so we go around the bases and we think, okay, what topic do we need to cover in this area? So that's why sleep became kind of essential, because if you're not sleeping, like I can't build a house on top of that foundation, right?
Yeah, right.
That's going to be the anxiety and all the other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So, we're going to work a little bit heavier on the physical stuff. And then we've done a really, really good job of getting some great people when it comes to social emotional and the behavioral type things. And I think typically when you go to parenting blogs and podcasts, there's a lot of people that have a behavior background and a behavioral approach to parenting. Ours is more educational. Ours is more kind of like I said, gestalt, teaching the whole child.
Yeah. Right.
That's just the way I was trained, and that's kind of our theory and philosophy and how it all works. We don't think behavior is the whole problem. We think it's part of it.
Well, I'm glad you guys are doing it. I think it's I won't say sorely needed, but it's needed as a parent. We're always learning things, and we're always getting good ideas from other people of things we can use to be better parents for our kids. And, it's all about making sure that we raise productive, respectful adults in this world. And I think that's why parenting is one of the most important jobs in the world, because you're held with that responsibility of having to do that. And it takes a lot to do that in the way the world is today, or any time period. I think it's always
one of the hardest too, right?
It is, definitely.
Yeah, well, absolutely. So, we've got a few things that, as a follow-up, we can offer to everyone here at Just Sayin. One is the Big Rocks Little Kids Planner.
Yeah.
So that's free and easy download, and just start using it. In the back of that is some resources. So that's where I mentioned things like Radish Kids, and it's actually broken down into physical, social, emotional, and cognitive, like that, right?
Yeah, right.
And then we also have a listening questionnaire. So sometimes parents are kind of stuck trying to figure out, well, where do I begin? So on our website, you can fill out a questionnaire, and then it breaks things down again into that kind of development. And then I mentioned earlier, we're doing the top 50 things we learned in 25 episodes.
Yeah.
It's a piece of what we learned, but got to filter it out.
No, it's great because you're targeting it. So I can look down that list and say, I want to know about that, so that's really very ingenious that you guys were able to go through and list the top 50 of the 25.
That's thanks to my partner, Mr. Powers.
Well, that's why, Brian's the marketing guy, right?
Yeah, man.
But he's also a parent. So
yes, sir, he is.
Right. So anyway, Darren McCarthy, thank you for coming on to the Just Sayin Podcast. Give my best to your co-host, Brian Powers. And for those of you who are listening, the website is here, and they have a phenomenal library of resources for you as a parent, or somebody who's a parent, or maybe they're going to be a parent, or maybe they're a grandparent and they just want to share some information with their kids. So check that out, and I think that you'll find that it's going to give you great information, because we can also learn something as parents. So check out the Sound Foundations for Parenting podcast. It's on Apple, it's on Spotify, it's on Google, everywhere that podcasts can be searched and found. And then also click on the links that are here to get additional information, and check these guys out, because they have very interesting guests on a regular basis, and you're going to get some information out of it. So Darren, thanks again for coming on.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Charlie.
All right. We'll talk soon.
You got it.
So our thanks to Darren McCarthy and Brian Powers for sharing insight and information about parenting. Make sure that you never miss an episode of the Just Sayin Podcast with Charlie Cornacchio by subscribing, or you could also find it on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, any podcast platform that you get your podcasts from, or on YouTube and Facebook for the video version of the podcast. And tune in next week, because we have a very interesting show set up for you. A recording session guitarist who had a childhood hero that he admired all of his life. He wrote a song for this childhood hero. The childhood hero took the song and didn't get permission from the recording session guitarist to use it. So the recording session guitarist had to sue this guitarist, who I'm sure you know, but we're teasing it to get you to come back next week. So tune into that one. We'll see how that one goes for somebody who had to sue his childhood hero. Interesting story. and we'll talk with Gene Moore about that. Anyway, that will do it for this edition of the Just Sayin Podcast. Make sure to download or order my book, How I Met My Mother and the Four Brothers I Never Knew I Had. And you can get that through Barnes & Noble or wherever you download your books. That will do it for this edition. Thanks for watching. Stay safe and be kind. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for tuning in to the Just Sayin Podcast.